meeting of the Greenbelt Advisory Commission. Can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Buttry,
Here.
Commissioner Kears, Chairperson Fite,
Here.
Commissioner Gordon,
Here.
Councilwoman Grand,
Here.
Commissioner Pearlman,
Here.
Commissioner Ransford,
Here.
Commissioner Schuler, Commissioner Stauffer.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Great, thanks. You'll see the agenda in front of you. Does someone have any changes to the agenda? And if not, does someone want to make a motion to approve?
Moved.
C2 is in error. There's a duplicate from last time.
That is correct.
Zelkowski property notation.
Right, so we'll remove C2.
Under C3A, my last name is spelled with an extra M at the end.
Okay, we will remove that. Any other changes to the agenda? Okay. Does someone want to make a motion to approve as amended?
So moved.
Support?
Support.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The agenda is approved. Moving on to approval of the minutes. If we want to take a minute to review the minutes from the last meeting. Okay, are there any changes to the minutes? I have one change, which is on page 2, under the recap panel discussion at AADL. Larry Dahl, his last name is Dahl, like D-O-L-L, like something to play with. Any other changes?
Oh, I guess if we're talking about typos, on page 4, under C4, letter from Barry Lonick, B-A-R-R-Y-L-O-N-I-K.
Any other changes? Does someone want, oh, Stephanie?
And then just right below that, Barry, 2 R's.
Okay, Barry with 2 R's. Any other changes? Okay, does someone want to make a motion to approve the minutes as adjusted?
So moved.
Support?
Seconded.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The minutes are approved. It's moving on to public commentary, and seeing no members of the public, we will move on to old business. Is there any old business that anybody wants to report? Okay. New business. We have the staff update. Remy.
Good evening. There has been no change in the budget since our last meeting. So heading on to item B. The Hayes property is the next Greenbelt project coming up for council review on April 15th. And to remind you all of that project, it's a 3-way split between Scioto Township, the Greenbelt and Washtenaw County, with the conservation easement being held by Scioto Township. I have invited or made note to Barry Lonick, the contractor with Scioto Township's program, that he may want to get on the agenda to speak at the public comment section of the council meeting, but I'll leave that to him to decide in terms of priority. But I think it was mentioned at the last meeting or meeting before that for projects where the Greenbelt, the city is the lead, a GAC member may choose to go and try and get on the public comment section, just to speak in support and give some details, nuance that might not be captured in the resolution to council. So that, for that, the next property that is a Greenbelt-led project is Kempf, which is going on May 6th, which the same time, or that same council meeting, another project, Landau, which is a fee simple acquisition the county is acquiring to add to one of their county parks that we are a partner on, will be going on May 6th as well. So that's kind of the outlook for the next month.
And I wanted to mention that in our executive committee session that we had talked about having GAC members speak, and Stephanie's going to speak about the Kemp property May 6th, but we'll be looking to others as we have more properties come forward.
C2 was stricken from the agenda. So C3, the scoring committee appointments. We discussed last time about restarting the scoring committee, and we need to make sure that there are only 4 members because 5 members constitutes a quorum. So at the executive committee meeting, we discussed all those hands that raised at the previous meeting when we were discussing that, and I believe this is these are the names of the folks that raised their hand, and I don't think we've excluded anyone. But if we're able to vote and appoint these folks, then we can begin meeting.
Okay, does someone want to make a motion to appoint the members of the scoring committee? Julie, is there support?
Support.
John? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? You all are appointed. Yay. Glad to see this moving forward.
Yeah, so I'll be in touch about sending a doodle poll for us all to meet and get coffee, of course. Strategic planning discussion.
Right. So next on the agenda is the strategic planning discussion, and I hope that people have had a chance to read through the strategic plan, and I do have an extra copy if someone needs one. It does definitely need, in my review, it needs some updates, and especially with some of the data that's in the report. And it looks like the statistics for agriculture are due out April 11th. So they were supposed to be due in February, and because of the government shutdown, that information was delayed. So once that information is available, we can update that. But I just want to throw it out there, people's initial thoughts. What do you think?
I have a comment.
Yes, go, Stephanie.
I was interested to see that there was a comment in the strategic plan on bicycle path, bicycle ridership and accessibility. And I don't remember seeing any kind of scoring in the scoring system that pertained to that. So I guess my request would be that when the scoring committee gets together, I suppose if we as a group decide that bicycle lanes and accessibility is still important, that the scoring group figure it in somehow.
Right, I think that's a good point. I noticed also some potential discrepancies between scoring and the strategic plan. It's been mentioned at at the city council about various members' interest in, does the farm sell to local markets? And that's an area that's not included in the scoring criteria. And I think it's, when farmland is mentioned in the strategic plan about the importance of that. And so I think adding in a criteria about whether the farm sells to local markets or direct to consumers would be worthwhile. So scoring committee, you can make note of that. Other thoughts, Stephanie?
Another comment, I know we have talked about the farm registry here over the past years, and I saw it was in the strategic plan, and I don't think it ever really got off the ground. I think I think maybe before Ruth, maybe when Ginny was here.
That's right.
It was Ginny, yeah. The idea was we were going to ask the farmers if they wanted to be in a registry, even if they weren't ready to commit or even thinking about an easement. But as I looked further into the details of the registry, in the strategic plan, it asked that the farmers who wanted to be on the registry kept the city up to date and told them if they were going to make any changes. And there were all sorts of requirements on the farmers, and I don't know if I was a farmer, if I'd want to be on the registry if I had to commit to different requirements.
Does anybody really remember? My recollection is that we actively decided not to pursue a registry.
Ah. Well, then that makes a lot of
But I
sense.
could be wrong. Or at least that Ginny finally recommended that it didn't look like it was just going to work out in an effective way. Does
Right.
anyone else remember that?
That sounds vaguely familiar to me.
Okay. Well,
I do remember a discussion of including points for being on the registry, that thinking about it for a longer period of time doesn't necessarily mean that you would score points. So,
that's right.
So it's something that we
What's
should,
the benefit to a registry?
well, so that we would have information at hand if, when someone applies, about the significance of their property and if they've made any changes and.
Or if they were going to sell it.
Right,
I saw the idea. I mean, this is
yes,
the weird part about a voluntary program where you're trying to garner support in the farming community. I think it was trying to thread the needle, the idea that you would raise awareness, get
Right.
farmers talking to each other about it. The registry would be both voluntary and non-coercive, right? They'd still have all of their options. The idea, I think, was really to foster communication between the farming community and GAC. But if I remember correctly, I think Jenny ultimately decided that it was going to be really hard to implement, that it would face some resistance in the farming community, especially with the expectation that people would be updating the city and telling them when they plan to sell.
Right.
So I think we could revisit it, but I think she looked at it and then recommended to us, this just might not be the best
right,
way forward.
yeah. Yeah. Any other thoughts on the registry? I don't think it makes sense, to be honest. Remy, do you have thoughts about it? Have you,
No.
in looking
I'm
through any of the
s-
records, any notes
No,
that you've
I'm
run
not seeing
across?
anything. I do have a few names on file of some folks that had expressed, probably in passing in an informal way, to either Ruth or Ginny, that they would appreciate getting a call from staff when prices reached a certain level for the per acre development rights value in their area. And averaging out some appraisals, one could argue that we're just getting there. So maybe a call is warranted to those folks. But I think that's about the extent of a registry that I've seen on file since I've been perusing.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. More generally, we can continue talking about some takeaways from reviewing the strategic plan, what was noteworthy and otherwise. But just to let you know that staff are working on potentially securing some outside funding so that we might be able to hire a professional facilitator to help us with a strategic planning process to actually update this. And it would either come in the form of a retreat or several sessions. I'm not sure yet, but it's exploratory right now, nothing guaranteed. But we're hoping that we can actually get this update beyond just, our casual conversations here, but in a more facilitated and guided process that really leads us to a nice outcome that follows our halfway point. This is year 15 of the program, so there's reason for a strategic plan and the 15-year anniversary to sort of work together to set the path for the next 15 years.
When might you know about the, I know it's not in your hands, but,
I would say, I think May or June,
okay,
potentially. More likely June, but I'll just have to keep you posted.
sure. Stephanie?
Another note I saw in the strategic plan is that somewhere it says, it is recommended that the strategic plan be reviewed yearly and updated yearly. I think we ought to take that note out. I mean, but anyway.
Well, I think that would,
we're
it is
getting-
good to have it reviewed annually, and whether that's, it could be have the executive committee
Yeah.
review it annually, so it's not, up to all members of GAC, and that somebody is keeping their eyes, making sure that we're moving towards the goals in the strategic plan.
Yeah.
But like going through this whole process, I think is, so a lot of it is data that needs to be updated, but it's really the goal, the goals, are these the goals that we want?
Mm-hmm.
Does it make sense, given the changing landscape? One of the, so I think it's well worth noting about the annual
Well,
update. But I think looking at it annually and reviewing and making sure it makes sense. I think it should be an executive committee role. What do people think about that? Yep.
Well, I think it's important to look back on kind of a living document like this on an annual basis for discussion purposes, for
Yeah.
alignment, to ensure that we know what the goals have been, and then at the same time are making sure that we're not missing anything that should be relevant in the current day. So the question I had from looking at it was, clearly this is not a strategic plan that's revised every year. And so, on what time schedule should that be done? Is that a 5-year process or a 15-year process or an 8-year process? But bringing it up for discussion, I think, on an annual basis makes a ton of sense. And kind of, guiding compass.
Yes. Thanks, Alex.
My takeaway from reading this was that this 2013 report was really looking back and saying, hey, we received these funds, and look at what we've accomplished over this period of time with these 5 focus areas. And, we've done a great job accumulating property and building out some blocks. And I guess the thought that I had from looking at that is, okay, now in this forward-looking setting for additional strategic planning, how can we take what we have the bedrock of and begin to prioritize specific areas that are adjacent to these blocks, really identifying essentially key parcels that are in the vicinity of our existing holdings, and know about those properties, know what their characteristics are, and in some ways have a kind of a running list of prospects that meet the criteria, and we would, gladly engage with a landowner to facilitate, our process, but in a calculated way where we know that there's about 20 or so great properties that we would love to have an audience with an owner, to make sure that they're fully aware of all the benefits.
Right, like we could send out a mailing to prospects saying, did you know about the Greenbelt program? And your neighbors have been a part of it, and can we answer any questions about it, something to
Yeah.
that effect.
Yeah, now that the building blocks are in place, there's good bedrock for where we know we already have these concentrated areas and where the county and our other partners are excited to engage. It seems like a short list as part of a strategy would be very helpful. Under the landowner section, I was pleasantly reminded that these sales do qualify for like-kind exchange using a 1031 exchange, whereby any gain from the sale of property, including, according to the strategic plan, including sale of easement rights, can be transferred into like-kind property. Well, real property is real property, and therefore an owner can sell easement or fee simple and actually exchange this into additional land for their operation, or into a property that pays them essentially just an annuity for the long term as essentially a retirement opportunity. And seeing that as a benefit to owners was a good reminder that beyond the preservation and potentially funding their operations, that there's a whole cohort that would be happy to sell, but they don't want to pay the taxes on the money, and at the same time don't know where to put that money. And so being able to guide owners in their post-sale activities with some best practices that we encourage, we're not the accountants, we're not the attorneys, but best practices for how to transition out of fee simple ownership or out of their conservation rights could be a way of attracting folks. So my thoughts are, how can this strategic plan lead to encouraging landowners to engage and be motivated to interact with the program?
Thanks, Alex.
That's a really great suggestion. It kind of reminds me, at the executive session, Remy was talking about how maybe it's at Vermont has a program to help intergenerational farm transfers, and that just the logistical, bureaucratic, tax paperwork involved in that is such an obstacle to many people, that if there were a way to think about a document or resources that we might have to help people think strategically, not in an advisory capacity or anything, but just having resources on hand that could be of use to them. I had never, until seeing this paragraph, had thought about that aspect of the benefits of the Greenbelt and how they might be highlighted for landowners.
Right. And MSU Extension, I think, used to have people, and maybe they still do, on staff that would work on farm transfer and passing down land to the next generation, but I'm not sure. I haven't kept up with it, whether they're still doing that work, and Remy's saying no, they're not. So there's definitely a need for someone to step in and take that over. I mean, it's not going to be the Greenbelt Commission, but certainly being able to provide resources in a way that would be effective would be a good thing.
There's a lot of conversation in the conservation community about the need for someone to step in and play that role of not providing tax or legal advice, but helping, open doors to new ideas of how to facilitate succession planning between the generations, or facilitating land access for new and beginning farmers to land, which is the number one access barrier for new and beginning farmers is always land. So with that, as John mentioned, the Vermont Land Trust has a full-time dedicated staff member who just facilitates relationships with existing conservation easement landowners, building trust, building understandings of what their needs are in retirement and their desires for the outcomes of their farm for the next generation taking over, generally getting a sense of that timeline, and then at the same time building the pipeline of those wishing to get on the land, and then has established an independent review committee so that when a farmer is ready to sell, Vermont Land Trust puts together their committee to vet a potential applicant to be the one, on behalf of this farmer, that they are protecting their land, on behalf of that farmer, vetting potential applicants and new buyers for that property. One of the major differences is that Vermont Land Trust is Vermont Land Trust. It's Vermont, the entire state, and that's one of the key differences. Is Michigan is characterized by 46 land trusts. There's there's no territorial disputes by any means. It seems like they all get along, but we, the Greenbelt, are one of many active conservation easement programs in Southeast Michigan. So figuring out who's best suited to be that relationship builder with such a high density and diversity of conservation easement holders just in Washtenaw County, with the townships, with the city, with the county themselves, all holding easements and having relationships with those landowners. Who's the person that can step in? It's a bit of an unknown at this point, but it's obviously a niche that needs to be filled soon, because we have a lot of protected property. As the map we looked at last time shows, in the last 19 years, we have a lot of protected property with a lot of landowners probably wondering what's going to happen, and not all of them are connected to the resources to build succession plans and connect with a new generation that might be interested in farming their property, whether it be niche agriculture or commodity ag. So all great points.
Well, one thing I wanted to ask about that was referenced in the strategic plan is Preserve Washtenaw. And is that group active? And if not, what is your sense of reactivating that group? Does it make sense? And is this an area, the succession planning, an area where that group could get together to talk about it for the long term?
So they're not active. Preserve Washtenaw. There was Preserve Washtenaw, and then it kind of even grew to a next level. There was a co-branding effort called Semi-Wild, which was Southeast Michigan Wild, among all the conservancies and potentially some of the municipalities. I'm not sure, but there have been efforts to get everyone on the same page so that we're all not reinventing the wheel, and that we have common strategies and better chances at partnership because we've developed common strategies that aren't conflicting in any way. I think that with a drop in participation or activity with Preserve Washtenaw and Semi-Wild, now we were looking generally, the bigger thought was maybe RCPPs can take their place. They force, not force, but in a voluntary way, get all of these conservation players to partner formally together on some bigger scoped targeted issue. And so, we, the city, are a partner to Legacy Land Conservancy's Huron River RCPP, and then we are the lead on the Greenbelt RCPP. So not all of the conservation players are partners on all of those RCPPs, only those which felt that they had something to gain by participating in it. But there is coordination, there's not enough. I think that's still obvious, but I don't know about reinvigorating Preserve Washtenaw itself, because ultimately getting in a room and talking about the need, I think we've done that over enough coffees and lunches, and now someone needs to just carry the baton of, I'm going to be the person facilitating these relationships in this bigger picture, but still figuring out who that is. It doesn't even have to be a conservancy group. There are other nonprofits suited to potentially take this role on, but whether or not they have an interest.
Well, I know that let me just check the name, the Grand Traverse Regional Land Conservancy, they've done a lot of work specifically with this intergenerational farm transfer. So that might be a really great resource to check in with them and see, how are they doing it just at that scale. And another really good model is the Maine Farm Link, which is similar to the Vermont program, but it's a little bit more user-friendly because it's just a website that potential farmers can go on, and then the application process moves from there. So it might be as simple as just having, maybe not a registry per se of farmers in the Greenbelt, but more of a registry of people looking for that intergenerational transfer side of the equation.
Yeah,
might be a simple,
absolutely.
quick fix.
I think there's murmurs right now of trying to set up some sort of land linking website. Again, that's one step.
Sure.
But the relationships are so crucial in that process, and the trust to list your land there and the trust that the person taking it over is going to be the right fit. I think there's a lot of value to the full-time dedicated staff, but among all the conservation programs in the region, we're all up to our eyeballs in deals and the time it takes to facilitate those deals. So if that's our directive, then we continue to do that. So until someone makes their directive otherwise.
Sure.
Yeah. But yeah, I think there are murmurs about a real estate site right now. To Alex's point about how this sort of represents a statement of where accomplishments have been made leading up to the 2013 report. I'm not exactly sure when the farmland complexes were drawn, but you all have the map.
Yep.
Just one thought on my end is that it's not impossible to run an analysis, a GIS analysis, that then gives a weighted score to every single parcel within the Greenbelt district. So it has a value, a known value based on an analysis that the scoring committee or others decide that it can be one component of a larger scoring system. But the farmland complexes don't necessarily lend themselves to reality of on-the-ground prioritization because it's just a blob. Whereas we could actually leverage the blocks that we've already started and start really focusing on, who could potentially be a high priority parcel, linking those blocks together in a more strategic approach to filling in gaps over the next 15 years. But that said, that's just one of many ways that can do it. We could prioritize all the parcels that exist within the farmland complexes and not just the entire Greenbelt district, because what do we get out of prioritizing a 1 acre parcel? We can start the threshold either by a geographic area or just by a characteristic of the parcel, whether it's 20 acres and above or 30 acres and above. There's a lot of ways to do it. And so the scoring committee and others can discuss that. But I think that's just important to note that this is sort of touting where we had gotten to by this point, but didn't necessarily lay out an effective framework for building momentum forward. And then to the point also that you've all been mentioning about succession planning and intergenerational farm transfer, if you go to page, I guess 4, it has the 4 primary areas to focus over the next 3 to 5 years, each of which will be discussed in more detail later in the document. But number 4 is conducting outreach and education to the Ann Arbor residents and other Greenbelt constituents. I think I'm certainly acknowledging that a bus tour might not be enough. A bus tour, we're one of the only ones that does a bus tour, and it's a really good thing to have for those folks that don't necessarily aren't able to access some of these properties in other capacities or have limited mobility. It's great. The bus tour is fantastic. But what else? And I think that's a question worth asking ourselves, whether is it just the city of Ann Arbor residents that we're focused on doing outreach to, and whether it's a targeted solicitation for interest in the program as a landowner is one thing, or just getting the folks in the Greenbelt district to understand what we've accomplished in their backyards, in their communities as well. It's not just for the city residents to know that we've accomplished this. It's for everyone affected by it.
Remy, do we have a sense in the public land, not the farmland, but the outright acquisitions, to what extent they're being used by the public recreationally for passive recreation?
No. No, it's something a lot of, I've heard folks ask that question about county preserves or some of the nonprofit preserves. It's really hard to gauge that. Attendance is obviously highest when you have an organized hike. But other than that, it's hard to measure without like an invasion of privacy with setting up a trail cam.
Back to your point about outreach, Remy, We have and it's noted here on page 16 about the events that we've participated in to do, to outreach to the general public. And I know that when I've volunteered to assist at those, that many members of the general public aren't aware of the Greenbelt program.
Yeah.
Or what it is or what it means, and they say, oh, your parks, or, so I think that trying to continue that effort is definitely worthwhile. But I think, again, more active outreach or thinking about where more active outreach could take place, targeted outreach is important.
I wanted to add that early on in this establishment of the Greenbelt, there were sort of town meetings
Yeah.
that were held at various town halls and sort of more out in the countryside that would be affected by the Greenbelt. And I thought those were really informative. People would, maybe they would go to a township that wasn't their own to be somewhat anonymous, and as they learned about the Greenbelt, those meetings were really effective, I thought.
So it could be said that being halfway through the program, going around to each township and having a progress report to the township supervisors or the board of trustees might be nice.
Helpful, and it might engage, the property owners who maybe haven't been approached yet.
That's great.
Yeah, suggestions where if there are also events in the townships where we could get the word out would be accepted and useful.
Quick question on the villages and the townships. At the time of the report, it was showing that, a number of the township villages were expiring in 2014. Do you know offhand, on average, when that next expiration is for some of the townships?
I don't for the townships.
Okay.
I know which ones are
I'm
active.
sure when
Webster's?
Webster's is, I know they re-upped it and lengthened it
Yeah.
for 10 years the last time. I'm not exactly
Yeah,
sure,
that'll be
but-
one of the things that we need to.
And they extended it before it expired,
Mhm.
so.
When we invite Barry Lonick to come and present to us all, we can grill him
Quiz
on
him.
that timeline. I know that the county's millage is up soon,
Okay.
so that's a pretty big one where.
2020?
2020,
Yeah.
I believe. So that's a big one where a
2022.
lot of our matching funds come from.
Right,
So that's
yeah,
one.
so my takeaway from looking at that chart was that, we're only as strong as our partners, especially with council desiring to see us participating at about a third of the participation in a given area. And so, despite the fact that we might have 15 years left, we're only as strong as our next expiring millage. And so while outreach for us continues to be important, the same momentum that you've been able to carry out with this recent activity in Greenbelt really is not for something that's 15 years away, but for this 2020 expiration, or for a township, something potentially even sooner. And so, a thought that came to mind for the strategic planning would be to encourage this body to always be cognizant of those partner organizations' funding timelines and, motivating outreach, in hand with them. What we're doing kind of ad hoc, but potentially more established in the strategic plan. And one thought that also dawned on me, a somewhat left field thought, but I've never seen a sign anywhere in Ann Arbor when I'm driving around that suggests that this project was in coordination with township, city, and is protected. In the same way that you see, the soybean signs or the historic farm signs. And just would like to put out for discussion this concept of encouraging signage, allowing farmers to essentially have a free sign from the Greenbelt and participating organizations, so that it could be on the road and seen. I'm curious what other folks think about that.
We do that with capital projects that are funded by the Parks Millage. So,
So there are signs. They're really lovely,
Yeah.
but I don't know that they're, at all of them, are there?
There are signs for, and it's optional whether the landowner posts the sign. There are not usually signs which list the partnerships or the funding partners. So it might be Greenbelt and so that a lot of landowners don't want multiple signs, so. that
They're
might
also
be
not that
something.
large, like, they're not as big as, say, like the MEP sign, you know, they're maybe like that.
Right.
So it's not that visible either from the
Right.
road.
Yeah, Barry sent me a picture recently of a project we participated in Ann Arbor Township on, I think, Warren Road. And it was both Ann Arbor Township sign and the Greenbelt on top of each other on a tree, you know, out front. But like you said, they're smaller than the MEP signs, which are really, you know,
Yeah.
attention-getting. So, but it's something to consider moving forward about how many signs we offer, what size are they, do we redesign, things like that.
I think we still have, don't we, John, sort of, I don't know, 50 or 100 Greenbelt signs that were purchased back in Ginny's day. But again, they're only about this big. And like Jean said, so many of the different properties had multiple partners that I think the thought was we could give you ours, but then what about Washtenaws, and what about Siles, and what about Webster's? And it just got to be too complex.
Maybe all the partners can agree on a sign.
That's right.
That's a good 15-year goal.
Yeah. That's about right.
Any other thoughts on the strategic plan?
I just wanted a sort of general comment when we're thinking about the goals, and I do think that they could be more clearly communicated in the strategic plan, and part of this is just the communication, letting them come out more. Seeing as how the goals have evolved over time, like the local food production was added in 2009, to what extent can the goals of the Greenbelt strategic plan evolve? Like how, you were saying we might have a strategic planning facilitated session. I guess the direction I was thinking, but it could be in terms of anything. If we're thinking of doing this in the context of the city's climate action plan, to what extent do we include any climate criteria, carbon sequestration or other things? Like what is the breadth that the goals can grow or change compared to the original millage, basically?
Interestingly, I was just looking over the ordinance, and so in the ordinance, under section 368, Greenbelt District Land and Criteria for Selection, subparagraph 3 says land acquisition criteria, sites for consideration shall be evaluated using the criteria listed below, together with any criterion determined by GAC to be appropriate to accomplish the purposes of this ordinance. So I'm not an attorney, and I need to ask an attorney, but just in general, I'm not sure whether that is saying these below criteria are how we're going to evaluate properties, and then GAC can go above and beyond that and establish additional criteria, but these original that are within the ordinance cannot be removed. What amount of flexibility exists there? And then from that criteria, if we're deriving purposes and targets in a strategic plan, how influential is that criteria, and how can it be weighted differently? If GAC establishes, it says GAC can establish criteria above and beyond that, so therefore the way it meshes with the strategic plan, if we're saying we care about farms that serve direct markets in Ann Arbor, that's an additional criteria. We can weight it higher than these other ones and give these very low weights, even though they're included within the ordinance, to sort of mesh better with actually fulfilling the strategic plan. So I think there's a conversation there that a lot of people need to be involved with, but it's just something that warrants further discussion
Okay.
with an attorney.
Stephanie?
I hate to reinvent the wheel, but I think these questions must have been asked when the original strategic plan was developed. And so old Dan Ezekiel, I think, had a big hand in that. So maybe, I know that you've been trying to meet with him, maybe he would have some insight, some memory.
I think it's one of the reasons to bring in a professional facilitator, whether or not we're able to really adjust from what the current strategic plan is or not. It would just be helpful to have a more comprehensive report that brings in folks like all the previous GAC chairs or invites some of the previous GAC members. And we have that continuity and history leading up to this, so there's a bigger conversation that's being had. Because if we're all getting in a room for a strategic plan, it's a public meeting, so we might as well invite them and have their input as well, and some of the background.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Okay, other thoughts? All right, so next steps, we'll wait to hear from you regarding professional facilitation. If that doesn't pan out, we definitely need to update this. The executive committee will talk about how we go about that if the facilitation doesn't happen. If it does, then we'll put out some timelines. So appreciate everybody's feedback and review of what's in there currently. It was a nice refresher for me, and I could see where much of the information needs to be updated. So thanks, Remy, for pushing
Yeah.
this forward. Okay. Next, going back to the agenda, is next agenda items. Does anybody have any? Okay. All right, and the next item on the agenda is closed session to discuss land acquisition. Do we do a roll call? I think we do a roll call vote to go into closed session, so Dina?
Commissioner Butcher,
Yes.
Commissioner Pierce,
Yes?
Chairperson Fight,
Yes.
Commissioner Gordon,
Yes.
Councilwoman Graham,
Yes.
Commissioner Carmen,
Yes.
Commissioner Ransberg,
Yes.
Commissioner Schuler,
Yes?
Commissioner Stoffel.
Yes.
I think there's this little
We're back from closed session. Is there a motion from the closed session?
Indeed there is. I would move to recommend city acquisition of a conservation easement on the property identified in application ID 2018-01 with funding from the USDA Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, ASAP, in partnership with Washtenaw County Parks and Recreation Commission, and approval of the contribution of funds not to exceed $138,367 from the Open Space and Parkland Preservation Millage.
Is there support?
Support.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right. The next item on the agenda is public commentary, and there isn't any public. Communications Committee. Stephanie, is there anything from the Communications Committee?
No, I don't believe there is.
Okay. Report from commission committees, the executive committee report. I can report about the executive committee, which we met on March 28th to discuss potential closed session projects. We also discussed the agenda for this meeting, and we received updates from Remy on current projects. We also talked about that an intern had applied for serving as an intern on the Greenbelt Committee, and this person has been accepted and will be working as an intern. We're very excited about that. Through the C's, this is a student at C's, and is going to be working closely with Remy. We also talked about the scoring committee and the strategic plan, needing time on the agenda for that, and the potential for a facilitator for the strategic plan that we already talked about. We also mentioned about moving the bus tour to fall. I don't know if this was mentioned at a previous meeting. I missed the last meeting. So I think that's great, and Remy is moving forward on that. That was it for the executive committee. And that's it from the committees. Does someone want to make a motion to adjourn?
So
All right, Sheila, support? Support. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.